Good morning, everybody. My name is Niall Turner and I'm the Occupational Therapy Manager at Clonmara. I'm delighted to be contributing to this section of the Research Study Day with Mary and Donal. I'm going to present on a clinical trial conducted in Detect between 2009 and 2013. This trial was of a two-pronged vocational approach for people with first episode psychosis and was funded by the Mental Health Commission. Firstly, to say that there is a report available on this work, so there's no need to frantically take notes. Please just email me and I will send you on a copy. Clonmara has a history of research in this area, and coming later I'll be presenting on vocational rehabilitation and occupational therapy research conducted in the service over the years. But briefly to bring you through some of the rehabilitation approaches that were available to people with mental health difficulties. In the 1980s, sheltered workshops were the main type of vocational rehabilitation available. These provided attendees to participate in work-like activities, but the main aim was not to move on to actual mainstream employment. In the 1990s, the specialist training courses were available, and these used the train then place approach, whereby people would train in particular skills and then gain employment in the area that they had trained in. The third iteration was supported employment. Supported employment used the place then train approach. An employment specialist would work with a person to rapidly return to work and then support them to retain that job through giving them ongoing support and also supporting the employer. This intervention was often delivered by a third-party organisation, so wasn't integrated with the health service. And this is one of the reasons it is believed that this approach wasn't as successful for people with mental health difficulties as for people with physical disabilities or people with intellectual disabilities. However, in the early 1990s, a specific supports employment intervention known as IPS was developed for people with mental health difficulties, and research commenced on it. By the early noughties, a lot of evidence had emerged that actually showed that it was a more successful approach than what was previously provided. The next development was including IPS with early intervention for psychosis. Unsurprisingly, the first trial of this took place in Epic in Melbourne, Australia, who were the originators of the model for early intervention for psychosis. Their trial showed very positive results. Not too far away, there was also trials underway for IPS with young people with psychosis. Miles Rinaldi and colleagues undertook one such trial and showed a 95% reduction in unemployment among people who used IPS. They also showed a gradual increase in the level of participation in open employment and were one of the first to show participation in mainstream education and training as a positive outcome. We in Detect were looking at this work with interest as we wanted to conduct a trial of IPS with our model of early intervention for psychosis. But we were also asking ourselves a question. What about those who were coming to the service who had not lost their productive role? Could we provide them with an intervention to ensure that they retained the role that they had not lost? After searching the literature, we found an approach called the Workplace Fundamentals module. And we decided to conduct a trial of Detect with IPS available for those who had lost their role and Workplace Fundamentals for those who had not lost their role. We developed a grant application and submitted it to the Mental Health Commission and were awarded the money to undertake this clinical trial. This allowed us to employ an employment specialist for 3 years. The pathway to recruitment was as follows. The referral to the service happened from primary care, and if there was a suspected psychosis, they were referred on to Detect. DETECT then undertook their assessment, and if it was a confirmed case of first episode psychosis, they were offered the DETECT interventions. At the time, there was an occupational therapist on the staff, and they undertook an assessment of needs and established what the current work status was. They also assessed if the person was suitable for the trial. If they were referred on to the employment specialist, who undertook an initial meeting and offered the correct intervention. They also discussed the option to participate in research, as it wasn't mandatory. The vocational outcomes that we were interested in was participation in employment or education, change in work status between the baseline and the follow-up, and the percentage of the follow-up period spent in paid employment and education. From this, 60 people availed of the interventions, of whom 38 consented to take part in the research. Their mean age was 38 years old. There was a 50-50 split in terms of men and women, and a 50-50 split in terms of education. There was slightly more people with a schizophrenia spectrum disorder than an affective or other psychotic condition. In terms of the results, we followed up 34 of the 38, and the mean length of the follow-up period was 18 months. We found that 62% had spent 1 month or more in paid employment, 27% had spent 1 month or more in formal education, 12% had participated in both. We also found that there had been a number of changes in work status. 50% had a productive role at both time points, 24% had attained a productive role by time 2, 24% were unoccupied at both time points, and 3% had lost their productive role. In terms of the percentage of the time spent in employment or education, the mean amount of time spent among IPS participants was 49%, and 90% among those who participated in workplace fundamentals. So what conclusions can we draw? Well, firstly, that people with psychosis can sustain and/or return to education or employment with an evidence-based intervention. We attained similar levels of positive outcomes in an Irish context compared with the UK and Australia, and that the job retention programme did boost the vocational recovery levels. However, it's important to point out that the best methodology would have been an RCT, but could not be undertaken for ethical and funding reasons. There is a small sample size, and an external fidelity review of IPS could not be conducted, again for funding reasons. Since this research, a number of positive developments have occurred. IPS has been recommended as a key component of an early intervention for psychosis service by the HSE National Clinical Programmes Office. IPS have joined many community mental health teams through the Service Reform Fund provided by the Department of Health to Genio. And the job retention programme has further developed and is delivered by Clonmara in the Occupational Therapy Department. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge many people who contributed to this work. Firstly, to the late Professor Éabhart O'Callaghan, to Professor Mary Clark, to all the DETECT team that assisted, and of course, to the participants. Thank you very much.